Hello guys, welcome to week 9. It's been over 2 months now that we've been doing crafts every single day. This week I'm just gonna do a very easy little crochet project. Since it's almost summer, we're gonna be making some fruit coasters for our cups. All the condensation from our cold drinks won't destroy our wooden furniture any longer. We now have some absorbent, fruity looking coasters. So today I'm making an apple. So I've got my apple colors, I've got red for the skin, I've got a very light tan for the inside fleshy part, and I've got a brown because I can't find black. I don't have any black yarn at the moment. So I'm using brown for the seeds. To make a slip knot, which is what we need, take your tip of the tail over top of your running yarn, and you can't go through the top because then you'll have to pull the tail through, which is not what we want. We want a nice long tail, and then you want to go through the bottom and pull the running string through for the slip knot. This way you can adjust it to whatever size hook you're using. Now to show you again, take the tip of your tail over top of the running yarn, go up through the bottom. You can pinch the cross to make it easier to grab, and pull the running yarn through. You do not want the yarn to be tight at all over your hook, otherwise it will be very unpleasant to work with. So wrap your yarn up over the top of your hook and across the front of your hook. So your hook is facing down, towards you at least. Hold your tail so it doesn't, get in the way. Wrap up over the top, over the front, and down. And then keeping your hook facing down, because that's where the little V in your stitch is, slip it right through. Wrap the yarn over the top, and then the front, and then underneath. And then keeping your hook facing down towards the V of the stitch, pull it through. Make 4 or 5 of these slip stitches. And then go up through the bottom of your first stitch, yarn over, and pull through. Now I'm tucking my tail in so that I can tighten the hole in the center. You don't have to tuck your tail in if you don't want to, but I'm going to keep it between my work in progress and the yarn that I'm working with. So the slip stitches have replaced the magic circle or the magic loop. If you know how to do that, you can go ahead and do that. That's totally fine. That's what I usually do, but I think this is probably easier for beginners, so I'm going with this. So take your hook through the center, yarn over, pull through just the center, yarn over again, and then pull through both of the loops on the hook. And again, I'm keeping my tail tucked in what I'm working with. So go through the center, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, and pull through both loops, keeping your hook facing down so that it can slip right through the little teardrop shapes of your stitches. Going around this, I did 6 stitches. You should probably do 8 because it's much easier. It'll sit a lot better if you're using the same size material that I'm using. Stupid chickens. The hook and yarn that I'm using, the hook is, I think it's 3.75 millimeters, and the yarn is just a regular worsted weight yarn. Once you have all 8 stitches, or 6 if you're using a smaller yarn, find the V from the very first stitch that you did. Go through just the outside stitch, outside of the stitch, yarn over, pull through, and then yarn over and pull through both of the loops. And this is an increase row, so we're going to do 2 stitches in this one stitch. And we're going to do that same thing all the way around. So find the V, go through the outside, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through. Do that twice in that stitch, and it always helps to keep your work not tight, you know? Keep it nice and loose and even stitches if you pull your yarn as you work so that it's not tight. So because we're putting 2 stitches in each of our previous stitches, and if you did 8 stitches originally, you will end up with 16 stitches. I did 6 stitches, so I'm ending up with 12 stitches on the second row. Keep in mind, when we're counting rows, we are not including the slip stitches that we did at the very beginning to make our circle. So once you have your second row done, we are going to put 1 single stitch in our first stitch and then 2 single stitches in our second stitch. And we're going to repeat that all the way around. 1 in the next one, 2 in the next one. So however many stitches you started with at the very beginning is how many increases per row you will add. So if you started with 8, on your third row you'll have 24. And on your fourth row you'll have 32. I started with 6, so my second row had 12, my third row has 18, my fourth row is going to have 24, and my fifth row is going to have a total of 30. It is very beneficial to learn how to read your work because you will not have to keep track of the exact pattern as strictly as you would if you didn't know how to read your work. So I can tell that my stitch has 2 stitches in it, and I can tell that it's right over a stitch that has 2 stitches in it in the previous row. Every single increase stitch is going to be in the same exact line as the previous row. And as the shape gets bigger, those increased stitches will start to look pointy, so it'll end up looking, you know, like an octagon or a hexagon or something. Always make sure to count every row that you do. That way you do not mess up your pattern. Like I said, I did 6 stitches, so I ended up with 12. And if you do 8 stitches, you will end up with 16 in your second row. If you're new to crocheting and you don't know how to read your work, like if you don't know how to look at it and tell what's going on, I highly recommend using markers so that you know where your row ends and begins. You can use a paper clip or a safety pin or a scrap piece of string, or they have these little plastic markers that you can get and you can just loop them on and they just sit there. So the pattern for each row is almost exactly the same. We're just adding 1 extra single stitch on every row. So our first increase row was doing 2 in every single row, and then our third row, which is our first row of this pattern, this specific little pattern, was just 1 stitch and then 2, and then the second row is 1 stitch, and then 2. The third row is going to have 3 single stitches and then 2 together, and so on. You can use this pattern and you can go as big as you want. You could make a rug, you could make a giant blanket, you could make a shawl, you can make a pillow, you could make a hat. You can do a lot of things with this continuous circle stitch. So here's where you will pause the video and catch up, finish as many rows as you want with this initial color, and then click play, and we will continue on with our next color. So like I said, I started with 6 and I should have started with 8. I had to stretch this out quite a bit just to get it to sit flat. Highly recommend starting with 8. So anyway, once you're caught up, we're gonna finish off. You can just slip your string right through, not a complete stitch, just a little slip stitch. Cut your string, pull it through, and then we're gonna tuck it in. Slip it through to the back, and then just tuck it into the backs of the stitches. Don't let it peek back out through the front. I like going through the little horizontal strands of the stitches, if that makes any sense to you. If your tail is long enough, you can tuck it down to the center, or you can just tuck it under a few, and it'll be secure. Again, you can pause the video here until you catch up. I was very thorough with my tucking. I went all the way to the center and I still had extra, so I tied it very, a very small knot with the original center string, and then I tucked that in a few stitches as well, and then I cut it. So moving on to our second color, I'm gonna go ahead and do the seeds first. So grab your brown or your black, and then just stitch 2 little lines, or however many seeds you want. I'm just doing 2 because it's just an apple. It's not like a watermelon or kiwi or anything. To make it thicker though, I did go through each of the stitches twice so that there were 2 layers of string. So once you've got your seeds tucked in, you can cut the strands in the back and you can tie them together and tuck those in, or you can tuck in each of the strands individually. I tucked one in through to the other, closer to the other strand, and then I tied them, and then I tucked both of them in to make sure it was extra secure so that my seeds don't fall out. I'm doing my best not to make the center of this too bulky, so I'm making sure they're very small knots, and I'm not trying to tuck in too much yarn in the same stitches, That way it can sit as flat as possible and not be bulky or wonky or anything. So now we're finally doing the outside, our last color. You can pop your hook in any of these stitches. I'm going right about where I left off in the previous color. And to make sure that my stitch is super secure, I like to yarn over with both the working string and the tail. That way it's kind of a knot. And then I tuck the tail under and I work the working string over top of that. And here we are going to continue that single stitch, however many, and then double stitch. I believe this is total my 7th row, but for the increased pattern, the single stitch and then the double stitches, this is my 5th row. So I'm doing 5 single stitches, and then I'm doing a double, not a double stitch, 2 single stitches, an increased stitch. So all the way around that, and then total I will have 30 because I started with 6. If you have 8 stitches originally, you will end with 40. Now, if your pattern did not turn out perfect and you're 1 or 2 stitches off, that is totally fine. As long as it looks fine, it's fine. I get distracted just as much as anybody else. I occasionally miss a stitch or have too many stitches. Usually it's I miss a stitch and then I have to add an extra stitch in the next row, which is fine. You can't really tell. And then once you've gone all the way around your perimeter, you just do a little slip stitch in your original stitch of this color. And then again, you tuck the tail in. And this time I'm tucking the tail in a little bit different so that I can just show you 2 different ways to tuck in your work. This way is a little bit neater, I think, especially if you're working with multiple colors. This method, I am just weaving it back and forth between my outside stitches, the stitches that I literally just did. And so I'm going in one direction, and then I'm going to flip over my work and tuck it back in, coming back the direction I just came. This secures the tail in very, very nicely. Once you're done tucking in your tail, you are done with your coaster. You can now enjoy your cold beverages without the threat of them ruining your wooden furniture. I hope you enjoyed this craft. I hope that my instructions were clear enough. If you have any questions, I will clear them up in the next video. We'll be making a bunch of different fruit this week. I hope you have a great day and happy crafting.